Now that I've covered the Black Swordsman arc and the Golden Age arc in its entirety, or at least well enough that no pertinent details were missed, it's time for us to talk about the third arc in the series. That being the Lost Children's Chapters. Now, as a point of clarification, the Lost Children's Chapters is a self-contained story within the Conviction arc. It's actually not its own arc. Therefore, to label it as an arc is a misnomer. But it's the one time in the manga where the events of the story are completely divorced from what's going on in the overarching narrative. For example, following the events of the Golden Age arc, you would think we would talk more about Guts' hatred towards Griffith, what's happening to Casca and Rickert, and what's going on with the God Hand and Femto. But no, it's a self-contained story about Guts going to some random village in which elves are attacking it. And yet, despite this fact, it still remains one of my favorite moments in the manga itself. In fact, if you were to count it as an arc, I would say it's right up there with the Golden Age arc. I would still put the Golden Age arc as number 1, but I would probably put the Lost Children's Chapters as number 2, which is saying a lot given the events that would come to follow. Now, because the events are completely divorced from what's going on in the narrative, the only two characters that carry on from the previous story are Guts and Puck. And in fact, Puck is someone we really haven't seen since the events of the Black Swordsman arc. No other character is seen or heard from in this arc whatsoever. So in this respect, the Lost Children's Chapters is akin to a side quest in a video game. Perhaps it's not completely necessary, but at the same time, it adds a level of detail, it adds a level of complexity, and it adds to the overall experience of the story itself. And there's a lot of personal growth that goes on with Guts in this arc. And in fact, it leads to probably one of the most pivotal moments in the manga itself. But we'll talk about that when we get there. In addition, there is one little side story that plays a pivotal part in the manga itself. In fact, there's a theory out there regarding this story, and it might be playing a bigger impact than we realize in the preceding arcs. But again, we'll talk about that when we get there. But without further ado, let's begin our journey in the Lost Children's Chapters with Chapter 95, The Black Swordsman Once More. On that day, the dead sun hung over all the nations. Somewhere in the Midland border region, a mother and son pray in the presence of a bad omen. Just then, they notice a group of knights riding past on their horses. And in fact, they're the Holy Iron Chain Knights. Now this is the army of the Holy See, and the Holy See is the central government of the papacy, somewhat similar to the Vatican. A man named Serpico wonders if the woman is Vice Commander Azan's type. Now Azan does not find this amusing, and reminds him that they are here for an apocalyptic inquiry, and to not stray over a mere woman on the side of the road. Serpico teases him some more by calling him uptight. In fact, that's probably the reason he's still single at his age. Now Azan considers himself a clergyman, so he has no intention of settling down with a woman or starting a family. The leader of the Holy Iron Chain Knights, who bears a striking resemblance to Griffith, instructs the men to put an end to their bickering. Serpico continues teasing Azan, as one of the men alerts the leader that they found what they are looking for. As prophesized, the Red Lake has appeared. The soldiers cast their eyes on a sight beyond words, a lake of crimson blood, littered with corpses of fallen soldiers. And of course, as the reader, we know this to be the location of the dreadful eclipse. The men are certain that this is the Red Lake that they are looking for, as foretold in the prophecy. Now, interesting little tidbit, in the real world, there's a Red Lake in Ontario, Canada, and local legend tells of two men from the Chippewa tribe who killed a moose there, and the moose's blood was drained into the lake, turning the lake's waters red. Now, does this mean that Miura knew of this Red Lake, and it was used as inspiration for his manga? That's really hard to say, but I thought it would be interesting to mention nonetheless. Azan says that when the sun dies 5 times, a red lake will appear to the west of the city, with a name both old and new. The leader of the Holy Iron Chain Knights, who is revealed to be a female, acknowledges this is the proof of the 5th angel, the Hawk of Darkness, the master of the sinful black sheep, the king of the blind white sheep, the one who shall call down upon the world in age of darkness. Now it's 2 years later, and we see a group of mercenaries who have stolen a small child. Now before they can cash in on this little venture, one of the mercenary men wishes to have fun with her, but the girl knees him in the balls, causing him to run off. Now one of the men says that this was a ritual tree. People would have their intestines staked to the tree, and they were made to walk around it as a means for sacrifice. The other mercenary men think this is a joke, but then faces of humans appear on the tree itself, freaking them out. The small thief then wants to perform a ritual with the girl. Now, one of the thieves thinks he's pretty sick for thinking this. What's interesting about this is that he's actually eating a human tongue while he's saying this. The small one then cuts the girl's dress, and while he's doing so, the shell of a chestnut lands on his head, startling him. Dag, the rat-faced bandit, looks around the trees, spotting Guts huddled under his cloak. Jill, the small girl, mistakenly thinks that Guts is some kind of forest ghost. Now, Guts has been sitting there for some time, trying to get some sleep. Now, Dag wants to use Guts for the ritual instead of Jill. Guts casually gashes his tongue open and wonders if the story about the tree is true. He tells the bandits to get out of here, unless they have a death wish. The leader feels confident in his numbers advantage, instructing Guts to leave his stuff and split. The leader looks to seize the initiative with his flail, but Guts counters by punching him in the face with his mechanical arm. Sorry, but one arm's all I've got. The 3 remaining soldiers don't back down. Guts' brand begins to bleed, meaning that the undead spirits are about to inhabit the area. The faces in the tree become much more pronounced. In fact, it takes on a demonic appearance as the bandits begin to panic. The tree crushes 2 of the bandits, as Jill can only watch in horror. The tree then chomps down on one of the bandits, as the other 3 run away for their lives. Guts rears back and swings his massive Dragon Slayer just above Jill's head and at the tree monster. Now, small little detail here, but notice that Jill's dress has been cut open by Dag. The reason that I'm pointing to this is that you're going to notice something that's interesting at the end of the chapter. Now, as Guts' sword pierces through the tree monster, he says it's too wet for firewood. Jill then thinks, it was much too big to be called a sword. Massive, thick, heavy, and far too rough. Indeed, it was like a slab of raw iron. Now, before we go on to the next chapter, around the time chapter 95 was being released, there was something else being released as well, and that was the Berserk illustration file. And it contains illustrated and colored works from Kentaro Miura from 1989 to 1996. In addition, this autographed self-portrait of Miura is included as well. So a pretty cool little item there. And in fact, you could still find this on eBay as well. Alright, so now we're on chapter 96, Elves of the Misty Valley. It's been 2 years since the Black Sun appeared. In a certain forest deep within a mountain ravine, there was a monster. A dreadful and fantastic spectacle. A man bearing a gigantic slab of iron sword longer than his own body. The demonic trees attempt a pincer move with its branches to trap Guts. Guts slices them down with blinding speed. As he races into action, the monstrous tree continues putting obstacles in front of Guts' way, but the black swordsman avoids them all, save for one small cut against his cheek. The tree eventually ensnares Guts in its trap, leaving Guts completely defenseless. Guts then places his cannon arm in the tree's mouth and blows it to smithereens. With the recoil of the cannon, Guts transfers his momentum to the right arm to swing his Dragon Slayer through the tree. Now, Jill can only watch this unfold with a look of horror on her face. And with the tree defeated, dark spirits emerge upwards towards the sky. The sun then shines through the clouds, dissipating the spirits into nothingness. First I've seen the sun in 3 days, says Guts. One more spirit remains in the roots, but Puck tosses a chestnut shell at it to make it go away. They always howl good and loud when we got one of these. Now Guts realizes that Puck was the one that tossed the chestnut earlier. Turns out that Puck was using him to save Jill's life. Now Jill freaks out, thinking that Puck is some kind of elf. An elf from the Misty Valley. Bewildered by this, Puck and Guts wonder what she's referring to. The bandits from earlier then make their escape through the forest, until they notice a deep haze of mist. Small shining objects whirl around them, and upon closer inspection, they notice that they are indeed elves. The supposed leader, who also appears to be an elf, sits on a high branch above the bandits. Now she has the appearance of a young girl, with a moth-like antenna and eyes to match. She then tells the bandits that they have stepped into a fairy tale for children. Now before we get into chapter 97, we have to get into volume 13, because right around this time it was being released. And with it came the addition of an author's note and an illustration of Femto. And it's an elegant illustration with Femto covering his right eye as blood drains from the left one. Which is kind of interesting because Guts lost his right eye during the eclipse, so is this some kind of metaphor for something else? I did allude to this in a past review, but in chapter 362 of Berserk, there was this girl that bared a striking resemblance to Griffith. Now, whether or not they're reincarnations of each other, or they're somehow related through some fashion, remains to be seen, but I did think it was kind of interesting how he was covering his right eye, and we notice that this girl's right eye is covered as well, and we notice that it seems like blood is coming down, so it seems like there might be some symbolism there, but again, it's hard to tell. So anyway, on to chapter 97, which is titled Jill. The young Jill points Guts over to her village, which looks pretty run down. Interesting detail, Guts lent Jill his cloak so that she could cover up her modesty, due to the fact that her dress was cut by the bandits. Guts enters the dilapidated town. Now the water is depleted, the buildings are crumbling, and the people seem extremely fearful. And Guts even remarks, looks totally run down. Jill pokes her head into a door, but immediately turns around in fear. A concerned woman approaches her. The woman is her mom, as she expresses her concern for Jill's safety. Guts notices a surly man as the man addresses Jill. Huh, Jill? Run out like that all of a sudden? Where the hell have you been wandering all night, eh? And it turns out that this man is Jill's father, Zepik, and he's wearing an old war helmet on his head, despite the fact that he's not fighting anymore. Jill scolds him for wearing that stupid thing, as Zepik explains that he was reminiscing about the glory days on the battlefield with his old war buddies. The old war buddies wave at Jill with smiles on their faces, and they seem to be sinister smiles, especially given the fact that Jill twitches uncomfortably. And upon rereading this, I think it's very likely that Jill was sexually assaulted by one or possibly both of these men. I mean, just look at her blank stare and general discomfort when addressed by them. And there's a moment later on in one of these chapters that sort of emphasizes this point, so we'll mention that when we get there. Now Guts is unsure on how to handle the situation. Zepik wants to continue drinking some more, but Jill fiercely snaps back at him, urging him to forget the past and focus on his family. Now Zepik does not hesitate in striking her across the face. After Jill falls to the ground, Zepik says, "We fought our hearts out so our wives and children could live in safety. I served my country, crawling around under cannonballs and coming away with a bum leg." Jill can only look on with contempt, as her mother urges her to apologize. Furious, Zepik begins to beat her with his cane. He screams and rages over her defenseless body, as the poor girl can only lie there defenseless. A chestnut then interrupts his fury when it hits him square in the forehead. "Bloody needle," says Puck. Now Guts wonders how Puck got into his satchel. Zepik approaches Guts in a rage, but the Black Swordsman blames the incident on Puck. Immediately though, the townsfolk shudder in fear. An elf? He's got an elf with him? Guts and Puck wonder what's going on, as Jill's mother urges her to get back into the house. "No, Mom! The elf saved me! He's not from the Misty..." But before she can finish, the townsfolk emerge from their houses with farm equipment in their hands. "Does your kind swarm about and eat corpses?" says Guts to Puck. The townsfolk demand that Guts hand over the elf, which the Black Swordsman obliges to, provided he gets some answers. Zepik becomes more insistent, as Jill pleads that Puck is not part of the Misty Valley. While mulling it over, an old lady attacks with a garden hoe. Instinctively, Guts sticks his leg out to trip the old lady, but he quickly realizes that he screwed up. The townsfolk's anger begins to bubble over, as Guts sticks Puck into his satchel. "Maybe they'll calm down if I kill one or two," thinks Guts. Now tensions are reaching their climax, as Guts pulls out his Dragon Slayer. And just by seeing the massive sword itself, it paralyzes all the townsfolk with fear. Guts slashes through a cart full of water barrels, and using this distraction, he runs past the villagers without harming anyone. Guts then uses a feature in the wall to hide from the townsfolk, as he laments on how things turned out. Puck angrily tells Guts off, since the Black Swordsman wanted to hand him over. He emphasizes his point by telling him that elves are cute, harmless, and well-regarded. "Since when did my satchel become your nest?" rebukes Guts. Their banter is then overheard by Jill, who happened to be passing by on a wall above. She apologizes for not warning them ahead of time, as Puck asks if she's okay. She then directs them to a windmill shed, where they can hunker down for the night. However, Guts instructs her not to come before the dawn, no matter what happens. She wonders what he could be alluding to, as he reminds her of what happened the previous night. Now that night, Jill watches her mother get beaten through a crack in the bedroom door. Zepik wants Jill disciplined for her behavior. Zepik's war buddy then notices a crack in the door, and he begins to lumber over to close the distance. Jill instantly panics and uses a wooden stick to lock the door from the outside. So like I was saying previously, it seems like this guy and that other guy were probably having their way with Jill sexually. Most likely they sexually assaulted her a couple times, which is why she had the bruises and seemed very scared by their mere presence. Now after failing to get into the room, Zepik's friend walks away. Jill then uses Guts' cloak to keep warm while she trembles in fear. The next morning, Jill rushes over to the windmill. Now inside, the pillars are all destroyed, as we see that Guts is sleeping on the ground while the spirits fade away. Now Jill wants to check in on him, but Puck informs her that he just fell asleep a minute ago. She then covers the Black Swordsman with his cloak, and thinks to herself, a Black Swordsman with an elf. He's come from a strange world, someplace I don't know, other than here. Alright, so now we're on chapter 98, Coming by Flight. Later in the day, a stray incubus crawls down the wall towards Guts. The Black Swordsman uses the backside of his mechanical arm to squish the demon spirit. Just when I thought I could sleep after 4 days. He then notices that Jill has fallen asleep on his leg, shocking him greatly. Yet, he's unsure what to do, but he does notice that there's some bruises on her hands and face, so he decides not to disturb her. Puck is startled awake by another incubus, causing him to fall onto Jill's head, waking her up in the process. Guts then takes this moment to ask Jill about the Misty Valley. She explains that the valley is east of the village, over 3 mountains, and for some strange reason, a mist hangs over the village all year long, hence the name Misty Valley. And there's even a legend that elves have lived there for a very long time. Puck wonders why the townsfolk get so frightened every time they hear the mention of elves. Guts flippantly says that some swarm must have gone rampaging through the woods, a notion that Puck fully denies. Jill says that the neighboring villages have been attacked by mysterious creatures. Fields and storehouses have all been destroyed, crops devoured, and even livestock have been killed. And there's a common thing among everyone who has seen them. They all claim that they were elves. Puck remains in disbelief, claiming that elves do whatever it takes to avoid being seen by humans. Thus, it must have been a mistake. Jill, however, clarifies that they are small insect-like creatures with wings on their bodies, and they are shaped like people. Despite the overwhelming evidence, however, Jill doesn't feel like something is right here. Perhaps a subterfuge is at play. Puck reiterates that elves are peaceful, happy creatures, but Jill says that the damage has already been done. Now, the real reason that the villagers are terrified by elves is because these little ones attack humans and devour them, and they even carry off the children, says Jill. There's a tense moment of silence as Jill stares off into space. Puck attempts to get her attention as Guts' brand begins to bleed. Realizing that danger is close, Guts leaves the windmill to look outside, and what he sees is beyond words. A stream of lights flies over his head, heading straight for Jill's village. Jill claims that these are the elves that she spoke of. Puck notices Guts' bleeding brand, as Guts says, well, they ain't pesky little elves. There's something else. And I've got to say, this is one of the most iconic faces that Guts makes in the manga. It's one of those rare opportunities where we get to see Guts smile. However, as we can see, it's not a smile of joy, it's more of a smile of maliciousness. The villagers come to the terrifying realization that the elves have come to invade their peaceful abodes. Terrified, the women clutch their children in fear. A barking dog is devoured in mere seconds as the elves move on to their next victim. Cows and pigs are treated no better, as the villagers attempt to barricade themselves behind the doors. The elves swarm in regardless, and circle over their victims. A child's mother and father are devoured right in front of him, as the elves leave him unharmed. Jill's mother wants Zepik to go outside and keep her safe, but the brute merely slaps her down. He continues to drink his alcohol, but seems genuinely concerned. Why's my luck so rotten, huh? Damn it all, says Zepik. Thomas from the Hansons runs away from the elves in fear. That is, until he runs into the Black Swordsman. Stay down, kid, says the imposing Guts. And with this, Guts flattens out his Dragon Slayer and swings it like Shohei Ohtani to kill dozens of elves in one massive swing. And interesting little tidbit on this, there's a website called skullknight.com, and one of the administrators there, Walter, made a list of all of Guts' kills over the course of the manga. And it's kind of interesting because majority of those kills happen within the Lost Children's chapters. And you might be saying to yourself, well, the Lost Children's chapters is only about 20 or so chapters. How can this be? Well, it's specifically because of moments like this. Moments in which Guts is literally killing dozens of elves in one swing. In fact, I think he kills hundreds of elves within this very arc. And at the very end of the arc, we'll go over his total kill counts because it's pretty impressive. But with that, that's the end of chapter 98. Alright, so now we're on chapter 99, Elf Bugs. Or by its other name, Elf Insect. Now after splattering several elves, Guts is standing in a very imposing manner as the kid stares up at him. Now the townsfolk in Jill's village are wondering why Guts is helping them out, especially given the events that happened the previous day. Guts then looks through a windowsill and sees the remains of a dead body, and he looks like he's ready for business right here. However, the elf starts saying, "Let's play, let's play." And we can see the humanoid bodies, the translucent wings, the antennas, and it just looks very sadistic and menacing right here. And Guts once again gets a smile on his face, a malicious smile, and he's like, "Elves, huh?" So it seems like he's having doubts that these are actually elves. He probably thinks that there's something else, something akin to apostles or demon spirits. And while the kid mourns the loss of his mom and dad, Guts is like, "Hey kid, you want revenge for mommy and daddy? Or else, do you want to go with these things?" The kid violently shakes his head, so Guts decides to use him. Now Jill makes her way back to the village as Puck tries to slow her down. He urges her that it would be best to wait in the windmill while things sort of settle down. But she remains adamant in trying to help out as best as she can. She then looks around a building corner and sees one of the boys hanging up by Guts' sword. Guts then sticks his Dragon Slayer blade up into the air with Thomas on the end of it. And it turns out that he's using Thomas as bait for the elves. He's going to try to lure them out of the city to protect the citizens, which is very risky business, but I guess one life is greater than the whole, or at least in Guts' mind. Now the villagers are not taking too kindly to this. They're like, how dare he? Dear God! Now this is nothing new for Puck. He's like, there he goes again. He knows full and well what happened during the Black Swordsman arc, and he knows that Guts is going to do whatever means necessary to sort of try to save as many people as possible. Even though it might seem crude and a little bit out of line, he's still trying his best to make things right. Now, as the elves make their move down towards Guts, Guts gets a smile on his face and starts to sprint. And he dashes forward and makes his way through the town. Now, as he's luring the elves out of the town, it is interesting to note that Thomas is going through a bit of pain right here. We notice as Guts jumps over a wall, Thomas is sort of like rocking back and forth, and even his shirt gets stuck around his neck and he begins to choke a little bit. Next, Guts runs under a tunnel, and we see Thomas's face mere inches away from the top. I mean, literally, this kid's face is mere inches away from getting torn off if Guts is not too careful. Meanwhile, the elves are hot on their tail, so he's got elves that are reaching out for him, and Guts who's just kind of violently whipping him around as he runs through the city. Then again, if Guts isn't doing this, he's getting taken away to the Misty Valley, so, what other choice does he have? Guts eventually makes his way to a rundown barn and finds some livestock dead inside. And not just dead, but absolutely mutilated. A sight that horrifies him and Thomas. Now Guts tosses Thomas off of his Dragon Slayer and decides to get ready for business. And this is when we really get a close-up look at the elves, and we can tell that these are not normal elves. They're not like Puck, they're very different. They almost have a very vicious insect kind of look to them. They almost kind of look like hornets. And Guts even refers to them as vermin. He then takes his Dragon Slayer and quickly slices down the supports to the barn. And with this, it gives way to the support structure, making everything come down. He then loads up his cannon and gets ready to blast it right in front of the elves. Now the recoil sends him tumbling backwards through the barn as Thomas comes running out. Now as all the elf-like creatures incinerate in the barn, Jill notices the fire off in the distance. Thomas, who got caught under Guts' cloak, can only look up in a terrified fashion at Guts. "You made a good lure, boy," says Guts. Now as Jill, Puck, Guts, and Thomas watch the barn burn, the former two catch sight of what Guts can sense thanks to his brand. A gigantic elf that is the size of a human child. An elf that looks very similar to the one that we saw in chapter 96. Now before we get on to chapter 100, we have to talk about Berserk, the prototype. Now, this is the precursor to the basis for Berserk, and is not part of the official canon. Now, as you may remember from the Black Swordsman arc, Berserk first came out in 1989. The prototype version was made in 1988, 1 year prior, and it was actually made while Kentaro Miura was still in college. Now, the reason that we're going to talk about this right now is that it was released on December 6, 2006 as a bonus in the volume 14 by Dark Horse Comics. And if you've read the story yourself, it actually fits pretty well in the location that they put it. It feels like it happened somewhere between the Black Swordsman and the Lost Children's chapters. Of course, it's not officially canon, it's not within the Berserk universe, but at the same time, it still came from the mind of Kentaro Miura, so I feel like it's still worth mentioning. And you can see a lot of the precursors that led to the Berserk universe as a whole, so it's definitely got a lot of interesting ideas, and it's definitely worth mentioning given that it's coming from the mind of Kentaro Miura. Of course, when we do notice those differences, we'll point them out and compare and contrast them with the manga. Now, it says in the little blurb here that this story is set after the conclusion of the Band of the Hawk story arc. Now, the first thing we see is a row of corpses that have been impaled by large spikes. And a lone man in a dark cloak walks among the corpses. That's a little much for scarecrows, says Guts. Now, the first thing that we'll notice is that Guts is wearing an eye patch. Now, in the Berserk manga, Guts loses his right eye in the eclipse. So this was already in the works for Kentaro Miura, but he decided to forego the eye patch in the manga itself, which I feel like was a good decision. He then opens his satchel and asks an unseen Puck whether he is frightened. Further down the road, 3 bandits approach a young, helpless girl named Frika, and it seems like they're fully intent on having their way with her. Interesting side note, this man right here bears a striking resemblance to Zod's human form, especially in the manner that he's dressed. As a small mercenary threatens Frika, an arrow goes straight through his forehead. He falls to his death, as 2 more arrows kill the other 2 mercenaries. We then see the man who was responsible for their deaths, and it's none other than Guts with an eye patch on. As an aside, notice that Guts' crossbow is not attached to his mechanical arm. It's actually a separate piece of equipment, unlike the canonized manga. Guts walks past Frika to inspect the turned over wagon to see if there's any food inside. Frika attempts to warn him about an ambush from a 4th bandit, but Guts already knew about this and slices the man's body in half. Disappointed that he can't pillage anything from the wagon, Guts looks over at Frika with a look of ambivalence. Due to his hunger, he decides to return her back to her village, in exchange for some food. While on the horse, Frika notices Guts' mechanical arm. Guts then crushes Puck with his arm, as the angry elf reveals himself to Frika. The young girl thinks that the elf is adorable, as Guts refers to him as an annoying little pest. Puck responds by kicking him in the nose. Now Guts finds the elf's antics annoying, as he threatens to boil and eat him if he doesn't shut up. Since Guts is hanging out with an elf, Frika determines that he can't be that bad after all. Frika gets her uncle's attention, as the other villagers are shocked to see that she's still alive. Her mother is relieved to see her, as Frika mentions that Guts saved her life. Later on, in Frika's house, Guts is given some food as he's told about the cruel man that rules over their village, Vlad Tepes. It was over 10 years ago during a war with a neighboring country. The Lord took 500 prisoners, impaled every last one of them on wooden spikes, and lined them up along the border. Not just soldiers either, women, children, priests, all of them. Even after 10 years, we've been commanded not to remove them. They still stand on the hill at the border, says Frika's father. Now after he ran out of soldiers to slaughter, he turned his hand against his own people. And a sinister rumor started years ago that the Lord was gathering young women and butchering them at night. 4 have already been chosen from their village, and none have returned. Guts surmises that the 5th one was Frika, as Frika's father laments that she didn't run away. Frika, however, didn't want another girl to die in her place. That's why she stayed. Guts asks for another drink as the villagers arrive to talk to him. Guts becomes enraged when he finds out that they want him to take out the Lord. And for him to do this, he'd have to take on the entire castle all by himself. Not only that, the reward would be pretty marginal since the village is pretty poor. An old lady attempts to appeal to Guts' empathetic side by begging him to avenge her granddaughter. But Guts shows little to no empathy to the woman, as he clarifies that he's not the chivalrous type. Now, interesting little side note, while Guts has his rough edges in the Black Swordsman arc, there was always a sense that he was a good-natured person. There was always a sense that he had some sort of humanity underneath the surface. And by reading the Berserk prototype, I don't really get that feeling. He seems way more jaded and cynical than any canonized version that we've seen thus far. And I'm really glad that Miura changed that aspect of Guts. He seems a little bit inhuman at this point. He almost seems like one of the apostles, which I know has been a reference in the manga, that he's so scary that he's actually scarier than the apostles themselves. But even so, there's moments that show his humanity, and you don't really get that in the Berserk prototype, so I'm glad that that was changed. Guts then brushes them off, as the old woman can only sob about the lamentable situation. Now, another interesting detail, in the Berserk prototype, Guts is referred to as the Black Knight, not the Black Swordsman. Now, Puck takes this opportunity to berate Guts for his heartless behavior. The old lady who had a family member killed. You should understand her feelings the most, says Puck. Now Puck says that these are very insensitive words, claiming that he should understand her feelings most of all. While walking away, Frika apologizes for telling everyone that he was a powerful knight and getting their hopes up. Could I take something of yours with me? Asks Frika. Now Guts only has weapons on hand, so he decides to give her his eye patch. While Guts walks away, Puck castigates him for only caring about himself and no one else. You're gonna live for nothing but dead people. You shouldn't do that. It's sad, says Puck. Guts angrily clutches onto the small elf and reveals that his mother was torn apart and had her innards eaten while she was still alive. What's more, Guts witnessed this event and it emotionally scarred him. Sorry, Puck. Killing them is all that keeps me going. I ain't got no life to spare for other people, says Guts. While the sun sets, a carriage containing Frika goes past. Guts then identifies the crest that looks strikingly similar to the brand of sacrifice. And you notice that this brand is much larger than the one we're familiar with. And it has a more rounded appearance to it. It's not as sharp. In fact, it more closely resembles the caduceus, which were the intertwined snakes that was the symbol for Hermes. And Hermes/Mercurius was the messenger of the gods. And he was a psychopomp, i.e. a person who escorted the dead to the afterlife. And given that the brand breathes life into apostles by taking the lives of others, it seems to be an appropriate use of the symbol. Mira definitely knew what he was doing here. But I'm glad that he changed the symbol up a little bit. I'm glad that it wasn't just a direct representation. He more or less made the symbol his own by making it sharper and more distinguished. Anyway, Frika is then taken to the castle as she comes face to face with the Lord himself. Vlad requests that she step forward so that he can gaze upon her beautiful face. As he touches her, Frika takes note that his hands are quite cold, and the smell that's exuding from him is reminiscent of something that's rotting. He's not human, remarks Frika. An arrow then pierces Vlad into the right eye, as we notice that it came from Guts' crossbow. Now Guts would happily give him a wound requiring an eye patch. Frika is utterly shocked that the Black Knight came to save her. Vlad proceeds to pull out his own eye, as Guts realizes that this is no mere human. He's something much more sinister. The doorway suddenly crumbles, sending Guts falling to the floor. The ornamental weapons seem to spring to life, as they all go flying to Guts' direction. Vlad Tepes then seems disappointed in Guts' quick death. Nevertheless, the Black Knight proves quite elusive in escaping death. Guts pulls out the spear from his abdomen and whips out his massive Dragon Slayer. Now notice that the design for this one is slightly different from the one that we know. In this version, the blade is tapering outwards towards the hilt. You'll also notice that he wields the sword with his right hand only, electing not to use a two-handed approach like he does in the canonized version. I'm gonna mince you up, dog of Vuana, replies Guts. Vlad is angered that Guts knows of the most powerful god of those who are not human. Boy, who the hell are you? Says Vlad Tepes. Unwavered, Guts dashes towards the massive beast, slicing a massive boulder en route to the monster. Before the Black Knight can deliver the crucial blow, Vlad grabs onto him and begins to squeeze. It looks like the situation is insurmountable, but Guts reveals a concealed cannon within his mechanical arm to blast the monstrous creature. With Vlad's poise completely broken, Guts gets the visceral on him by slicing through him with his massive Dragon Slayer. Innards and blood spill all over the Black Knight, as Vlad expresses his disbelief in a mere human being defeating an apostle of Vuana. Who else but a human would hate you bastards this much? Says Guts. Now you notice in this panel here that the brand is on Guts' chest and not on the back of his neck. It's also much larger than the canonized version. Vlad remains stunned by this revelation as a boulder crushes his body. Guts, Frika, and Puck escape the crumbling castle as the Black Knight returns the girl to her family. Puck then thinks to himself that Guts was much scarier than Vuana's apostle. He looks so sinister, says Puck. Now Guts has no intentions of healing up, as he wants to continue killing many more apostles, as many as it takes to reach his ultimate goal. And with that officially ends the Berserk prototype. Let's get back on track with chapter 100. And this chapter is titled Queen. The elf leader puts her hands on her knees and smiles maliciously at the black swordsman. You're really strong, mister, even though you're human. How come? Questions Rosine. Puck and Jill stare in awe at the giant human-sized elf. Guts identifies her as the elf leader, yet he has his doubts, referring to her as an insect. Rosine calls him mean and urges her subordinates to take care of the grown-up. Puck then determines that these are no mere elves, as Rosine races towards Guts. Guts swings his Dragon Slayer with blinding speed, as Rosine swiftly dodges. Guts is then stunned to find out that he missed. Once more, his bicep was pierced quite significantly. Puck checks in on Guts, as Rosine performs an intricate aerial display. Puck urges Guts to calm down, but Guts says that if he's not quiet, he'll swat him down too. "Listen, they're definitely not elves. They're children," exclaims Puck. Puck is determined this by the way that they're acting. While this is happening, Rosine and the other elves mock Guts as only a child would. Rosine notices Puck on Guts' shoulder and warns him not to speak to humans. "That's what we call Peacalf the Outcast," remarks Rosine. "Peacalf gets punished along with the humans." Now Puck has a change of tune as Rosine races towards them with killer's intent. Before Guts can ready himself, Jill intervenes by putting her arms out. "Stop it, Rosine! It's you, isn't it?" screams Jill. Rosine dodges at the last second, slowly realizing that she remembers Jill. Now Rosine merely stares down at her as she takes her elves and leaves the village. Due to his wound, Guts collapses to the ground. In fact, he was most likely poisoned by Rosine. Jill helps Guts to his feet, as one of the villagers notices that the cattle barn and the winter provisions have all been burnt up. "Thomas! You use Thomas like that! Have you no humanity?" yells an old lady. Despite the accusations, Guts can only smile. "You people make me laugh. When this kid ran out, did any of you unlock your door?" They demand that he return Jill and Thomas back. Jill begins to walk towards her mother with hesitation. She begins to reconsider her decision, as another villager screams in terror. Now the elves that died in the barn burning have all reverted back to their human forms. And given that Guts destroyed the barn, they can only surmise that he was the one behind the incident. Realizing that the entire village is against him, he grabs onto Jill and says, "Change of plan. How about you all step aside?" Guts then reveals that he's got a massive knife, giving the impression that he's going to kill Jill if they don't comply. Now before we get into chapter 101, Young Animal released yet another telephone card of Puck in the summer of 1997. And this one features Puck performing some sort of yoga move with a mosquito on his head. And it's a pretty cool picture, I like it. I kind of wish they still made these telephone cards, but, I guess they've gone the way of the dinosaur. Alright, so now chapter 101, Will-o'-the-Wisp. "How about you step aside?" implores Guts. Although I suspect that Jill trusts Guts here, she does display some nervousness when looking at Guts' blade. Now Puck warns Guts that he's pissing off the villagers even more, and he's thusly handling this the wrong way. The villagers notice that Puck is with Guts, strengthening their suspicions that Guts is in league with the vicious elves. Now Guts slowly moves his way through the crowd as they begrudgingly let him through. They don't want anything bad to happen to Jill. Unfortunately, when his back is turned, a villager sneaks up on him from behind and prepares to strike him with an axe. Guts catches sight of this and spins around, using Jill as a shield. In fact, he even breaks the skin on her neck, making her quite nervous. "Give it up. My body's gone numb, and I don't know when I'll lose control." Jill's mother passes out from the anxiety, as Puck begins to lose it himself. With this, the villagers take heed and allow Guts to pass through. As they walk through the village, Zepik looks over at his daughter. As soon as he locks eyes with his daughter, however, he spins around out of Guts' sight. Jill becomes disheartened at her father's lack of desire to save her. After reaching a safe distance from the village, Guts instructs Jill to go home. Puck excoriates him for his treatment of the young girl. Guts clutches onto Puck and shakes some of his dust on Jill to cure her small wound. He apologizes for putting her into danger and begins to walk away. Jill suspects that he's heading to the Misty Valley, so she asks to accompany him. "That girl, that big elf. She might be my friend who vanished a long time ago, so..." Guts curtly tells her to give it up, since her friend is no longer human. He clarifies his intent of killing Rosine, and instructs her to stay away since this is no kid's game. While Guts walks away, Jill contemplates how nothing changes. Nothing ever happens. She then touches the scar on her neck where Guts cut her. Puck berates Guts for his crude behavior, especially since Jill gave her shelter and food. The elf then notices blood dripping from Guts, and offers to take care of his wound. Guts waves him off, provoking a reaction from Puck. Guts then clarifies that he doesn't want Puck buzzing around anymore. Puck, however, attempts to win him over, but the black swordsman clutches onto him and says that seeing elves makes him sick. Puck attempts to use his teeth on Guts to fight back, but Guts merely tosses him away on the grass and walks off. While Puck mopes, a shoe in the grass startles him. Now due to the poison setting in, Guts is retching in pain. He then thinks about the burnt bodies at the barn. Now, to offset some of the blood loss, he catches a snake, beheads it, and drinks the blood from its neck. Lost too much blood, says Guts. Now you may be wondering to yourself here, what's the benefit of drinking snake blood? Does this actually have any medicinal value, or is it just something added into the manga to make it a little more interesting? It actually turns out that in some Asian cultures, drinking snake blood does have some medicinal purposes. Now, I don't know if it's actually been tested, but some people claim that it increases vitality and stamina. There was actually one study that showed that when you drink snake blood, it increases the size of your heart, which is kind of interesting. In fact, in Malaysia, they'll mix the snake blood with brandy. And they say that it will cure aches, arthritis, asthma, acne, and mysterious maladies of a sexual nature. So, being that Miura is Japanese, I'm sure he's heard about these customs before and decided to add it into the manga. And given the fact that the manga takes place during the Middle Ages, it's extremely likely that someone might look at snake blood and presume that it does have some medicinal properties. Now, whether or not those claims are true or not is really beyond the scope of this video, but I thought it would be interesting to add it nonetheless, just to give you something to ponder over. Guts holds back yet another bout of vomiting as he heaves to catch his breath. The Black Swordsman has lost too much blood, the poison is setting in, and weariness is getting the best of him. He then gnaws on some cocoa leaves to reduce some of the pain that he's experiencing. Yet despite all of this, he notes that it's going to be a long night. While he stares into the fire, his brand begins to bleed. The sight of the demon child in the fire draws his attention, shocking him greatly. He then takes note of his surroundings, seeing the bodies of many burning children, a sight that has put him on the edge of insanity. Now Guts mistakenly thinks that the demon child is the one that brought the burning spirits here to torture him, as we see that Jill and Puck are en route to Guts' location. Alright, so now chapter 102, Red-Eyed Peacalf. Now the children's spirits are slowly walking towards Guts, moaning in intense pain. One of the crying spirits tries to touch on the Guts, but he whacks him away without a second's thought. Now as the severed body of the child flies away from him, Guts can do nothing more but vomit. The children's spirits howl in pain. He then looks over at the demon child, raises up his dragon slayer, and attempts to kill him. Nevertheless, the demon spirit flies up into the air. "You really know how to get under my skin," says Guts. "You'd make me babysit brats all night while I puke up this blood? Fair enough. If it takes me all night to cough up this stuff, at least I'll be able to pass out in the mud come morning," says the deranged Guts. Now, elsewhere, we see that Jill is startled by a wolf, but Puck reassures her that because he's around, the wolf won't come anywhere close. Now, Jill still has her doubts that Puck is actually an elf. As they walk, Puck asks if it's a good idea for her to be going to the Misty Valley, which is infested with inhuman creatures, among them possibly Jill's friend, who is now a monster. And even though she might regret her decision, she's already come this far, so she might as well press on. Jill and Puck then notice a light off in the distance, as we see that Guts is slaughtering his way through the demon spirits with a look of rage on his face. He mercilessly swings his dragon slayer through their bodies, which dissolve upon contact. He approaches one child spirit that calls out for its mommy, and after a brief hesitation, he swings his dragon slayer through it like hot butter. Jill closes the distance on Guts' location, wondering exactly what the heck is going on here, as she watches Guts swing through the fiery spirits with a manic smile on his face. In fact, it's almost beyond manic. It looks like a smile of happiness. It looks like he's taking some joy out of this. So no use, he's totally gone. A spirit then approaches Jill from the rear, screaming out "Mommy." Guts continues his onslaught, not taking a second's breather. He then goes for a child to his rear, but then notices that Jill is standing in the way. And this moment's hesitation to save Jill's life allows the fiery spirits to jump onto his back, which start to singe him. "Master Swordsman!" screams out Jill. To get out of the situation, he grabs onto Jill and jumps off of a small cliff. Now while they did avert certain doom, they fell down a jagged rock cliff, causing the Black Swordsman to pass out. The next morning, just as the sun is rising, Jill wakes up and finds herself lying directly on top of Guts. "Move. You're heavy," says Guts. Guts instructs Jill to sprinkle some of Puck's dust on him, since he hurt himself on the rocks and can't move at the moment. Jill apologizes as Guts wonders why she's following him. He then inquires about Peacalf. "So what is Peacalf?" says Guts. And Jill proceeds to tell him the tale. And I quote, "Long ago, in a village there was a boy named Peacalf, with pointed ears and red eyes. His parents loved him very much, but he would always be bullied by the village children because of his eyes and ears. They called him Red-Eyed Peacalf and Pointed-Eared Peacalf. Peacalf thought, 'This isn't my home. These people aren't my real parents.' because neither PCAF's father nor mother, nor even one person in the whole village, had red eyes or pointed ears like him. One night, PCAF snuck out of his house without his parents knowing. He went to find his own real parents in his own world in which to live. He made his way alone into the forest, where elves were said to live, where the grown-ups said never to go, and PCAF found them. They had red eyes and pointed ears. Certainly, they were the same as him. But this is what they said to the overjoyed PCAF. "You're one of us? No, not true. You haven't wings to ride upon the wind like we do." Seeing PCAF's confusion, one of them informed him of something. Long ago, a human man and woman brought a baby here who was close to death from illness. We have broken the law of our village and entered the forest to save this child. This child is our life. Please, somehow save him. When PCAF heard this, he ran off in great haste. With tears in his eyes, he went swiftly back the way he'd come. But when PCAF returned to his house, it was all too late. On top of a small hill between the village where he no longer knew a single person and the elf forest where no human was allowed to live. For some strange reason, even though he'd only been in the forest for a few moments, in the village, hundreds of years had passed. PCAF the outcast cried and cried, his red eyes swollen even redder. "Not much of a happy ending," replies Guts. "Rosine loved that story," says Jill. "In fact, she once told me, I'm just like PCAF." And with this, we see Rosine off in the distance. Now, before we proceed forward, there's an interesting little detail pertaining to PCAF. And in fact, I made a short video covering this very topic. So I'm going to put a portion of that theory right here in the video to show you what I'm talking about. Now, the second important point is that PCAF has red eyes and pointy ears. Now, throughout the manga, we've only known one person to have red eyes, and that would be none other than the Skull Knight. Now, is this to suggest that the Skull Knight is in fact PCAF from the fable? That's really hard to say. What's important to realize is that Skull Knight has had dealings with elves in the past, and due to their influence, he attained red eyes. And obviously this is not too surprising, since his armor came from the dwarf Hanar, and he had a purported love interest with the Lady Priestess of Cherry Blossoms, the one that resided on Elfhelm. So this information was pretty obvious from the get-go. We already knew about this. But it's the third point that this leads into that's pretty important. Now, throughout the manga, some people have noticed that Guts has unusually pointed ears. Now, this could be just due to Mira's drawing style, or it could be hinting at something else. In chapter 92, Skull Knight suggests something rather important. Seldom do elves reveal themselves to humans. Maybe you have some tie to the elves. Now, this could suggest that Guts has been healed by elves at a very young age, attaining the appearance of elves just like the fable of PCAF. Now, we know that Guts was born from a hung woman. Furthermore, Skull Knight knew this information. He knew that Guts was born from a hung woman. Now, is it in fact possible that Skull Knight used elf dust on the young Guts to keep him alive at this point in time? Or is it possible that a group of elves found the helpless Guts and provided him with some magic to help protect him until he was found by some people? Now, a third theory that is floating out and about is that Guts himself is a dark elf. What does this exactly mean? Now, bear with me because this is a bit of a stretch, and it's not necessarily something I wholeheartedly believe in, but it's just kind of an interesting theory to ponder. Now, normal elves bring levity, cheerfulness, and happiness to the world. They're basically like a good fortune. Presumably, dark elves would be the exact opposite. They would bring darkness, gloom, and tragedy. Now, for example, if Guts is a dark elf, ponder this. Guts was taken in by Gambino. After this happened, Gambino lost his wife. He then lost his ability to fight in battle and eventually lost his life. Subsequently, Guts joined the Band of the Hawk. And about 3 to 4 years later, they were all slaughtered and Casca was raped. And with that theory out of the way, we're on to chapter 103, The Recollected Girl. Rosine was a girl 4 years older than Jill, who lived across the street. And to an only child like Jill, she was like a big sister. Rosine wasn't your typical girl though. She enjoyed playing in the woods so that she could catch bugs and small animals. And she collected all sorts of trinkets that she would call her treasures. But there was one treasure in particular that was a bit odd. An egg-shaped stone that looked like a human face. And Rosine found it on a riverbank and always took good care of it. Puck looks over at Guts with a shocked expression, as Guts continues to listen intently. Now the two girls would play all day long until the sun set. Now it turns out that Rosine did this purposefully to avoid going home. And that's because her parents would fight often. And as a result, Rosine had bruises on her cheeks and arms. Jill, the story of Peacalf isn't really right, said Rosine. In the real Peacalf story, it turns out he really is an elf. Even now he lives happily with his real father and mother in the land of elves. And to tell the truth, I really belong in there too. Now before Jill was born, her village got wrapped up in a big conflict, and the villagers took refuge in the forest to protect themselves. Unfortunately, Rosine's mother didn't escape, and she ended up being raped by one of the mercenaries. Because of this, the father had doubt that Rosine was really his child. And on one rainy night, Rosine woke up Jill to inform her that she was leaving the village and going to the Misty Valley. The Misty Valley where all the elves lived. Farewell, Jill. I leave all my treasures to you. Now the adults searched for her for the coming days, but they were unable to find her. Oddly enough, her parents vanished from the village shortly afterwards. Jill proceeded to look over Rosine's treasures, but noticed that the egg-shaped stone was not among the contents of the box. Sometime afterwards, the elves started attacking the villagers. Now given Jill's situation at home, she started to understand how Rosine felt. Puck then emerges from Guts' satchel to show Jill the bailet. Now Jill says it's the same one that Rosine had, as she wonders what it could be. And Puck responds by saying it's a freeloader at his place and his body pillow, Betchy. Now Guts explains that it's a magic stone that summons those who grant power. And these beings that bestow the power grant it to the weak. But these so-called angels might not actually be angels, but something much more sinister. Guts is still unsure on the method in which you summon the 5 angels, but one thing is for certain. Rosine ended up summoning them, and by doing so, she obtained her pseudo-elf form. It's much like the Peacalf tale. To obtain something you need to give up some collateral. More specifically, the God Hand requires a sacrifice. And not just any sacrifice, they require the most important thing to you in exchange for power. A few days later, her parents vanished, you said, says Guts with an eerie smile. Guts skips the obscureness and says that Rosine offered them up to have her own wish granted. Her own parents' lives as sacrifices, says Guts. Let's put an end to this. Guts warns her that this is no fairy tale, and that if she sticks her neck out any further, she'll end up dead. Guts puts his Dragon Slayer on Jill's neck, and says that he won't be stopping his sword next time. Now, Jill has a 1,000-yard stare as she attempts to process what's going on. This is no place for some kid who snuck off from a loser father and a powerless mother to go wandering around. You're a nuisance. Puck attempts to rein Guts in as Jill goes in for a slap to the face. Guts easily catches the wrist and says, "Kids have their own fairy tales. You want to escape? Stick to Peacalf." And with this, Guts takes his leave. Puck accuses Guts of child abuse, as Guts pins him down with a small pile of rocks. Now Puck reassures Jill that she's not at fault, and that kids always suffer for society's faults. "Yeah, but it's embarrassing and frustrating," replies Jill. Jill's crying is interrupted by the appearance of a large creature which flies above. And it just so happens to be the Apostle Rosine, as she makes her swift landing. Rosine stares at the scared Jill with the utmost confidence. The Apostle then closes the distance, as Jill can only tremble in fear. Rosine places a small frog on Jill's head, and begins to laugh as only a child could. Jill recognizes her old friend, as the Apostle gives her a peck on the cheek. "It feels like ages, Jill," says Rosine. "Rosine? Is it you?" And with this, we're on to chapter 104, World of the Winged Ones. Guts feels a faint stream of blood oozing from his brand of sacrifice. He looks back toward the way he came, realizing that an apostle is nearby. As Jill looks at Rosine, the latter makes a silly face to put her friend at ease. Rosine pays Jill a compliment by saying that they're almost the same size now. Jill still remains in doubt that this is really Rosine, as the latter shows off her new body, which has the appearance of an elf. "Well, it's like I tell you, this is the real me," says Rosine. "Yup, the queen of the elves." Jill remembers the words that Guts spoke of in regards to the sacrifice to obtain power. However, Jill chooses not to confront Rosine on the issue. Now, in honor of their reuniting, Rosine offers Jill an invitation to the land of the elves, the Misty Valley. Jill's stomach begins to churn, but before she can respond, Jill pulls her in for a warm embrace. "It's a good place you can play and have fun all the time, even after the sun goes down," says Rosine. She pulls Jill in for a hug and intends to rise off of the ground. This brief ascent is cut short, however, by the surprise attack of Guts with his Dragon Slayer. Rosine accelerates to avoid the deathly blow. Despite this, the tail from one of her wings was hacked off. She screams in pain as Guts looks poised for the next assault. This is when the mask comes off for Rosine and the elves, as they reveal their sinister forms. Jill begs Rosine to put an end to this, as the Apostle decides to fly off in the other direction. Puck screams for Jill, as Guts seems more disappointed that he didn't get to kill Rosine. "Guts, you almost killed Jill too," says Puck. "Did you mean to kill Jill too?" "So what if I did?" replies Guts. In response, Puck performs an albatross death blow, a special move of former pro wrestler Killer Khan. And it should be noted that Kentaro Miura was a big wrestling fan back in the day, so it is always interesting to see when he puts those references into the manga. While Guts winces in pain, Puck takes this opportunity to tell Guts how rotten he is. "Even a zombie fails at being as rotten as you, inhuman scumbag." He'll now refer to Guts as the bastard swordsman, as he flies off with tears in his eyes. Guts peers down at Rosine's severed wing, contemplating if he held back because Jill's life was on the line. But he quickly dismisses this notion. Rosine flies Jill through the clouds, as the latter fears for her life. The Apostle reassures her that she won't let anything happen to her, and that she should just enjoy the splendid view. The world, as seen by only birds and us winged elves. Jill marvels at the breathtaking beauty of the wondrous landscapes. In fact, while at this height, her village seems very small. "In that tiny place, I became frightened and small." "You can fly all you want, to your heart's content, Jill. That is, if you become one of us." Alright, so chapter 105, Guardians, chapter 1. The elves continue gliding through the sky with a look of whimsy on their faces. Jill displays some apprehension at the notion of becoming an elf. Rosine questions her about the Black Swordsman, even suggesting that she has a thing for him. Jill blushes a little bit, and thinks about how she doesn't even know him. Now Rosine notes that he's heading for the Misty Valley. Fortunately for her, it's guarded by some dependable grown-ups. Rosine says that the grown-ups would never hurt children. It's as if they are the forest guardians. Now Guts makes his way to the Misty Valley, and it appears to be a wood full of dead trees cloaked in a fog. While there, Guts' brand begins to bleed profusely, indicating that danger is lurking somewhere close. He then comes across a large ball of human corpses. Now, before we proceed forward, if you ever played the game Dark Souls 3, there's an enemy called the Skeleton Ball. Now, it acts as a trap and rolls back and forth through an assigned corridor. It exists in the catacombs of Karthus, and bears a distinct resemblance to the ball that Guts is staring at right here. And as we go through the rest of the manga, you're going to notice that Dark Souls, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, they all have some kind of references to Berserk. And in fact, when we get to it, when Rosine goes through her metamorphosis, you're going to notice that there was a specific boss in the Dark Souls franchise that was modeled after her. But anyway, back on track. Several bodies emerge from the center mass of the ball. In fact, they are the bandits Guts met when he first saved Jill. "You can't pass. Anyone who would hurt the children. We won't let any of them pass this point." Guts mocks the inhuman creatures, as they begin their assault by rushing him on all fours. Guts begins by using his throwing knives to stun the first one. He then uses his repeating crossbow to knock the first two on their backs. Now, they appear to be dead on first glance, but it turns out that they're not as susceptible to death as humans are. Guts then swings his Dragon Slayer at the one that looks like a hybrid between a scorpion and a centipede, but the monster blocks his attack with his pincers. And again, there's another Dark Souls enemy that looks very similar to this, and that would be Najka from the Shaded Ruins. Now, for those unfamiliar, she was part of Dark Souls 2, and she was probably one of the least remembered bosses of the series, since she was just a reimagining of Quelaag from Dark Souls 1. But it's still cool to see another Miura creation make its way to the Soul series. Now with Guts' sword stuck, he's in a defenseless state. Another bug flanks him and moves in for the attack. Guts utilizes his immense strength to swing the Dragon Slayer horizontally to cut the Centipede Man in half, all while the Scorpion Man is hanging on to it. He then raises his blade upwards and thrusts it down to obliterate the Scorpion monster in half. Now the bandit leader decides to take his turn, as he transforms into a large beetle-like creature. it charges Guts, ready to cleave him in half with his massive pincers. Now because Guts backed into a tree, it prevented the pincers from closing down on him. We then see that Guts' dragon slayer is protruding from the beetle's backside, as the pincers close down on the black swordsman's neck. In desperation, Guts raises his repeating crossbow and begins to fire at will. He attempts to release himself from the pincers, but is unable to do so. Instead, he thrusts his sword through the beetle to end its life. With the pincers releasing, Guts avoids the fourth insect monster and does a flip to slice it clean in half. Now with the deep cuts around his neck, he begins to cough up some blood. Unfortunately for him, he discovers that the nearby branches are littered with dozens of similar bugmen, who are all waiting to attack him. Alright, so chapter 106, Guardians chapter 2. The insects warn him that if he aims to hurt the children, he cannot pass. I'm not going anywhere. There's no way I'd ever pass through and leave even one of you alive. Every last one of you is dead. The insects close in on him as he gets ready to play the part of exterminator. Mosquito-like creatures begin their assault as Guts fires his crossbow. Guts then goes berserk, as only he can, firing his crossbow at every last bug that crosses his path. After massacring the first wave of bugs, he clutches onto his dragon slayer to take care of the second wave. And if you thought that he went berserk before, just look at this man. I mean, he's going ultra berserk here. Meanwhile, Puck continues venting about Guts. He even asks a bird what could make his personality so screwed up like that. What the heck happened between Guts and the God Hand things anyway? Especially his relationship with the Raven one, thinks Puck. And I've gotta say, I've always loved this image of the God Hand. You know, amongst all the destruction and bleakness of Guts' life, it's always nice to have a moment of levity every once in a while. And unsurprisingly, Puck always seems to fill that role. A whole human life stained with nothing but rage. Now what would do that, wonders Puck? The elf shakes off his concerns now he's separated from Guts. He then proceeds to pluck off the feathers from the raven's head, resulting in a harsh pecking and being thrown off. While he descends towards the earth, Puck notices the dense mist below him, indicating that he has arrived at the fabled Misty Valley. The small elf steels himself, prepared to do whatever it takes to rescue Jill from harm's way. Meanwhile, Guts has completely obliterated any bug that has crossed his path. In fact, some of the carcasses are still hanging from his body. I never thought you'd really be able to defeat them all, thinks an unknown insect warrior. Both insect warriors are naked in their human forms, as they ponder if the black swordsman is really human after putting on such a gruesome display. In a flash, one transforms into a mantis-like creature, as the other one transforms into a massive beetle. The mantis charges Guts at blinding speeds, as the black swordsman counters with his dragon slayer. Unfortunately for Guts, the mantis' speed got the best of him, as he notices cuts on his hands and arms. The beetle flanks him from the side. He then leverages the sword in such a way to send Guts flying into the air. Alright, so chapter 107, Pursuers. Now this chapter was released in a Japanese magazine called New Type, and it was issue number 10, and inside that issue was an illustration of Guts, Casca, and Griffith from the 1997 anime. Most likely, this was promotional material for the anime itself, as the first episode would air 1 week after this issue was released. Now this chapter begins with the villagers of Jill's village burying the incinerated bodies of the children. A crying mother laments that her son may be among the dead bodies, as her husband attempts to comfort her. Meanwhile, Zepik watches over the affair from afar while he drinks his liquor. The villagers then notice an army riding past them. Father Hobbs urges them not to worry, as the soldiers mean them no harm. Coming into clear view, we can see that the forces are the Holy Iron Chain Knights. Their leader, Farnese, calls for Father Hobbs. We have been sent to this place by the Holy See on a mission for a miracle recognition. I am Farnese, leader of the Holy Iron Chain Knights. Hobbs invites her into the church, as she instructs her men to assist with the burial of the dead. Hobbs tells Farnese about the elf and the black swordsman. Though the story is hard to believe, Farnese will verify its authenticity by following the black swordsman. She then informs Hobbs that eyewitness reports of evil spirits and monsters have increased the past 2 to 3 years. Now, Farnese believes them to be falsehoods, but one common variable seems to persist with all these reports: the presence of the black swordsman. In fact, every time they trace his steps, they always come upon a grisly incident. And having seen the burnt children, Farnese believes that this may be the culprit behind the numerous rumors. Although she suspects him to be a criminal, she ponders the notion that Guts may be of some importance to their religion. Now, notice the symbol of the Holy See, and how it looks strikingly similar to the caduceus. It also looks very much like the original brand of sacrifice from the Berserk prototype. Father Hobbs implores them to meet with the Black Swordsman and to ascertain the truth on the matter. Unfortunately, he's heading to the Misty Valley, and it is there that many vigilante groups have met their demise. Zepik then enters the church to volunteer for the job. He returns home in high spirits and begins to look for his old armor. Meanwhile, Guts performs a backflip after being tossed by the Beetle Man. Now these two are much stronger than the rest, on account that they were knights in their previous life. The two bug monsters then charge together, leaving Guts vulnerable. Guts tries his best to defend himself, but the gang fight proves to be too much for him. Not good. Can't fight them both at once. The two charge again. Guts blocks the attacks from the Mantis, before spinning around and swinging his Dragon Slayer at the Beetle's horn. Despite this, the sword can only cut partway through. With his hips turned for dodging, he can't utilize his full strength to finish them off. The two bugs then intend to charge him once more, but this time from opposite sides. Guts realizes that dodging is impossible, so instead, he fires his cannon at the Beetle, and uses the recoil to spin around and slice the Mantis in half. Alright, so now we're on chapter 108, and this came out in Young Animal issue number 20 with this cover. And right over here in the right hand corner, we can see an illustration of the Black Swordsman himself. Alright, so chapter 108, The Misty Valley Part 1. Now there's a nice image of Puck sitting on top of a beetle dangling a piece of watermelon for him. Now this chapter begins where the last one finished, with Guts obliterating the two former knights in spectacular fashion. The carcasses of the bugs spill onto the ground, as the weary Guts has been pushed to his limits. Although no major arteries were cut, he's lost a significant amount of blood. He then notices some elf dust on his hand. In fact, his whole bag is coated with it thanks to Puck. He then sits among the corpses and begins to rub the dust on his wounds. Meanwhile, Puck is ready to take on the vicious elves, but instead finds out that the Misty Valley is quite a peaceful place. It actually looks like paradise. He rests on a lily pad, noticing that he feels strangely at ease here. He then hears a commotion and decides to go check it out. And it turns out to be some of the elves from Jill's village, and they're playing with a berry as though it was a ball. Unable to contain himself, Puck eagerly joins in on the frolicking. The elves then convene with each other, noting that Puck looks different than them. Puck disguises his appearance, as one of the elves hands him the quote-unquote ball, which is in fact a human eyeball. The queen returns with her new friend, as Puck throws the eye onto the ground. Rosine's headquarters is a giant cedar tree, a sight that Puck finds quite magnificent. Rosine's elves glow in a brilliant fashion, as Puck can only watch on in awe. A large mass of light glides past him, as he wonders what is going on. Rosine urges Jill to make herself at home, as the elves provide her with berries and place a garland on her head. Rosine informs Jill that the flowers are always in bloom here. Furthermore, the trees always bear fruit, and it doesn't get cold in the wintertime. In effect, it's a veritable paradise. It's a secret garden just for elves, a place where human grown-ups cannot bother them or inflict harm upon them. If I had known the Misty Valley was like this, I'd have come here with you sooner, says Jill. Together they look up into the sky, as the elves frolic above and throw petals upon them. Alright, so chapter 109 of Berserk was released in Young Animal issue number 21, and it was released on October 24th of 1997. And it featured this cover image of Guts with his Dragon Slayer. In addition, the Berserk 1998 calendar was promoted in the lower left-hand corner, as well as the 1997 anime in the lower right-hand corner. As Jill and Rosine watch the elves frolic about, the latter asks Jill if she's decided to become one of them. Sorry, Rosine. I still don't know. Sorry, replies Jill. Now Rosine wants her to spend the night and think it over. She reminds Jill that there was nothing fun in the village, and there especially wasn't anything as fun as flying. Jill continues to stare off into space as she thinks things over. Puck lands on her shoulder, explaining that he has to rescue her. Now Rosine wonders where Guts is, as Puck explains that he gave up on the Black Swordsman. Effectively, the team is disbanded. Puck reiterates his point that they need to make their escape, but Jill explains that she was asked to become an elf. Yet, the girl remains undecided in her decision, asking Puck what she should do. Now, Puck doesn't hesitate to call the supposed elves absolute monsters, since they attacked and ate humans. Attacking and eating humans is what wolves do too. Maybe that's just what you do when you're not human, replies Jill. In fact, she can't find anything more enjoyable, and given the fact that she had to deal with being hungry, cold, and possibly raped, life in the Misty Valley doesn't seem so bad after all. In fact, it seems like paradise given her past circumstances. Puck attempts to use Jill's mother as leverage to make her go home. Now Jill thinks that she'll end up like her mother, a spineless pushover who allows her children to get beaten. Or maybe I'll become my father, bullying my child when the mood strikes. While she contemplates this, she unconsciously squeezes tighter and tighter on the Puck. After releasing him, she notices that the elves are playing war in the nearby grass. They're quite organized in their movements, with leaders and soldiers alike. One of the leaders yells charge as the brutal onslaught begins. This is when Jill and Puck realize that the elves couldn't distinguish between play war and real war. The corpses fly in every direction, as Jill and Puck can only watch in horror. What makes the situation worse is that the elves are dancing for joy in achieving their victory, something only a human could do, or possibly a monster. A pursuer catches one of its targets, pins him down onto the ground, and transforms into a monstrous bee/wasp. It then proceeds to use its stinger to pierce the other elf in its genitals, a sight that utterly shocks and disgusts Jill. After vomiting, Jill is offered the dead elf as a meal. She screams in terror and slaps the monstrous elves away. Upon hitting the ground, the deceased elf reverts back to its human form. In fact, the whole battlefield is littered with dead elves, and they've all been reverted back to their original forms. The angered elves cannot accept Jill's refusal, as they all begin their grotesque transformations. Jill is paralyzed by fear, but is forced into action when Puck urges her to run. She ran, the human children? And the chapter ends with Jill and Puck fleeing for their lives. Now, a few things happened between the release of chapters 109 and 110. First of all, Berserk Forces was released by Suzumu Hirasawa on November 1st of 1997. And as most of us know, Suzumu Hirasawa composed the OST for Berserk, the 1997 anime. All except for the opening song by Pen Pals and the end song by Silverfins. And it's a soundtrack that is very synonymous with the Berserk franchise, and is still a banger to this day. In fact, Kentaro Miura was a big fan of Hirasawa's work, and used to listen to it when he was drawing his various panels. Naturally, Miura selected Hirasawa to do the OST for the anime, and the subsequent games that would come to follow. And, as I say, the rest was history. 3 days after the release of Hirasawa's album, the Berserk 1998 calendar came out as well, with a plethora of new images for every month of the year. And I've already made a video going over the calendar itself, so I'll just briefly show some of the images right here. But you're definitely encouraged to go check them out for yourselves, as they're very detailed images that look absolutely fantastic. And finally, the albums for Pen Pals, Tell Me Why, and Silverfins, Waiting So Long, were released on November 6th of 1997. And each one of those albums contained original artwork as well, so very cool additions to the Berserk franchise. Alright, so chapter 110, Cocoons. As the two make their escape, the fog continues to get thicker. Jill collapses from exhaustion, but Puck urges her to get up so they can use the fog to conceal their escape. Jill's gaze then wanders to the objects directly above her, and it turns out that the entire ceiling is covered with bulbous masses. Puck's curiosity gets the best of him, as he touches the viscous, sticky substance. And to his amazement, he realizes that something is inside the bulbous sac. Just then, one of the cocoons cracks open, as one of Rosine's elves emerge from it. They're cocoons! These things hang in here! They're all cocoons! Rosine interjects by informing them that these are the emergence grounds, where human children are reborn as elves. Rosine glides down to Jill, asking why she tried to run away. Jill mentions how the elves were killing each other, but Rosine reminds her that humans do the exact same thing all the time. Oh right, human children are cowards. It's alright. If you become an elf, it's not scary. It's fun to go all out. Jill reminds Rosine that if you die, you're really dead. Rosine says that more friends can always be made, and then mocks her for hating to be human. Rosine then reminds her that if she goes home, a real war may be waiting for her in the future. So she can either have fun as an elf, or cower as a human. What's more, hunger, cold, and beatings are all things she'll have to endure as a human. But if she stays, she can have everything that is fun, everything she ever imagined. Everything as long as she becomes an elf. She can even fly in the sky as she pleases. Jill trembles in fear, but Rosine reassures her that she'll make her into an extra special elf. An elf that can't be harmed by the others. Rosine then begins the process of creating a cocoon around Jill's body. And while this happens, Jill becomes very sleepy. Puck yells out to Jill to snap out of it, as Rosine says that he's the monstrous peacalf. She attempts to attack him with her antenna, but instead slices one of the cocoons in half. A half-formed elf child then falls out, And because of this, Jill becomes absolutely mortified as she screams in horror. Just then, the depths of the nest are engulfed in a blaze of fire, incinerating all the cocoons. And upon closer inspection, we find out that the fire was started by Guts, as we see that he's holding a torch in his hand. Puck and Jill are shocked to see him, as Rosine is furious that he got past her insect army. Guts proceeds to swing his sword through one of the pillars supporting the cave. The fiery cocoons descend to the ground, as they hit the elves who are passing beneath them. Now Rosine doesn't let up, as Guts gets that crazed look in his face. Jill then thinks to herself, for an instant, swaying inside that blaze, he was the one who looked more like a terrifying monster to me. Alright, so now we're on chapter 111, Monster. Zepik is seen guiding the Holy Iron Chain Knights throughout the Misty Valley. Due to being careless, Zepik leads his horse into a root and falls over. Now, he attempts to save face, as Azan wells up from what he perceives to be the devotion of a father to save his daughter in the Misty Valley. Now, due to the rough terrain, the Holy Iron Chain Knights will proceed forward on foot. One of the soldiers notices the naked bodies of many men strewn about the forest, in a most gruesome fashion. Now, unbeknownst to Farnese and the Holy Iron Chain Knights, these are the men that got slayed while they were in bug form. They only reverted back to their human forms upon death. Azan surmises it was the work of the Black Swordsman, with a small group of soldiers. Yet, Serpico thinks otherwise. Based on the method that these bodies were mutilated, he suspects it was the Black Swordsman and the Black Swordsman alone. Possibly with an axe, or perhaps something bigger than that. And he came to this conclusion because all the corpses are in the same state, and only one person could wield such a massive weapon. So, ipso facto, it seems that it was all the Black Swordsman's doing. Azan takes all this information and concludes that the Black Swordsman is indeed the Hawk of Darkness. Farnese then cuts him off, saying that they shouldn't utter that name lightly. And with a look of fury on her face, Farnese thinks, Black Swordsman, no, Hawk of Darkness. I swear I will catch you personally. I swear it on my faith. In the next panel, we see Guts swatting dozens of Rosine's elves with a single swing. The massacre continues, with Jill watching on in a frightened state. And we next have one of the most iconic moments in the manga, one in which Guts walks through the fire, corpses, and wreckage in a crazed manner. And I gotta say, this is truly one of the most deranged and unhinged moments he's ever been in the manga. This is the full reflection of her inner darkness, a full reflection of her inner shadow, and a precipitating event for what's to come in terms of her inner psychology. Rosine is impressed with Guts' efforts as a human, but she will now unleash the full brunt of her forces. Guts assumes a defensive position as the numerous elves attack all at once. Rosine wishes the Black Swordsman farewell, but Guts merely smiles in a manic fashion as he plunges headlong into the fire that he created. He endures the excruciating pain, so that all the elves may be burned alive. He then drives his sword upwards into one of the sacks, to douse out the flames on his body. Guts then stands back up, with blood, mucus, and corpses all over his body, looking like something straight out of hell. Are you really human? What the hell are you? Screams Rosine. Now, before starting chapter 112, we have to discuss a few things that came out beforehand. On December 1st of 1997, New Type number 12 was released, with an illustration of Guts from the 1997 anime on the inside. On December 4th, a Guts autographed drawing was included with the 1998 calendar. And on December 10th, Animage released its 12th issue. And inside was an illustration of Guts, along with some other still images from the anime. On December 16th, Berserk came out with a special Blitzkrieg issue, with a nice cover of Guts riding on his horse. Additionally, a fold-out poster of Guts fighting Rosine was included as well, and there were some autographed drawings of Guts included as well. Now, chapter 112 was released in Young Animal number 1, with this intro cover, and it's another beautiful image of Guts holding his Dragon Slayer. And inside this issue was a telephone card of Guts, along with a comic strip of Puck acting silly. So a really nice collection of Berserk items for the fans. And all this was leading up to the Christmas of 1997. And without further ado, we're finally on to chapter 112, Flying Demon. Guts proceeds to spit out the intestines of the partially incubated child. Jill can only compare Guts' barbaric behavior to that of a forest ghost. But the man standing in front of me right now, was not so gentle a creature. He was in fact more terrifying. Enraged by Guts' crude behavior, Rosine charges the Black Swordsman. Unfazed, Guts raises up his Dragon Slayer, ready for the final battle. Rosine uses her whip-like antenna to flick Guts in the face, which he blocks with his sword. Guts counters by cutting off her left moth antenna and slicing her wing partially. Rosine realizes that her speed is neutralized by this cramped space. In addition, her poisonous dust is rendered useless with the burning flames. The Black Swordsman sneaks up behind her to deal a fatal blow. Rosine manages to evade the blow, which surprises Guts since he thought he had her. Jill attempts to persuade Rosine that there's no hope in fighting Guts, since he'll stop at nothing to kill her. Guts aims to finish off Rosine, but as he moves into the fire, his brand begins to bleed, much more so than it did previously. He then stares up into the flames, and sees Rosine rising up with a changed appearance. "Everything's burned up," says Rosine. Her new transformation is more monstrous than human. Now, like I alluded to earlier in the video, there's a boss in Dark Souls 1 that looks very similar to this. In fact, I'm pretty certain that the Dark Souls boss was modeled after Rosine, and that would be the Moonlight Butterfly of the Darkroot Garden. Rosine then says, "My elves, my land. Before long, all of it was burnt in these flames. It can't be stopped now." But she doesn't need that now, as she spreads herself out and reveals her new insect form. She will thusly create a new home and new elves. That is, as long as she has Jill by her side. Before this comes to fruition, Guts will pay for his transgressions. Her whip antenna fully stretches out, like an oversized spear. She then charges at Guts with it, and her speed is blinding fast, leaving Guts worried about what's to come next. Now, in late 1997, Young Animal releases Telephone Card of Guts. Now, the artwork was done by Yoshihiko Umakashi, the same man that did the character designs for the Berserk 1997 anime. And in case you're wondering, he also did the character designs for Mushishi, Casher and Sins, and My Hero Academia. Afterwards, he did the concept art for Young Animal No. 2, which contained Chapter 113 of Berserk. And the cover was painted by Yukihiko Kiwakawa. And this chapter is called Bloody Night Sky. Puck and Jill have escaped the burning, smoking cave. With her new insect form, Rosine charges Guts at full force. Guts uses his sword as a shield to deflect Rosine's spear-like antenna. The impact still sends him flying out of the cave. Rosine then flies overhead as Guts notes how fast she is. That's funny. Maybe I was off target from losing my antenna. But next time, sting. Rosine's enormous wings have fanned the flames, which now engulf the surrounding trees. Rosine remains on the offensive, attacking Guts at blinding speeds. Guts then falls over, as he wonders what the explosive blast was that was following her. Rosine reminds him that it's futile to struggle on, as she's the fastest thing on the earth. Now, sidebar, we know that the force that Rosine was creating was that of a sonic boom, which means that Rosine was traveling at a speed of 750 miles per hour, or Mach 1.12. And that's the necessary speed required to create a sonic boom. So, the fact that Guts was able to deflect her attacks while moving at those speeds is nothing short of remarkable. Now, I'm not saying that he's moving at supersonic speeds, but instead using instincts and battle experience to avoid imminent danger. And this very notion is verified in a much later chapter. It actually happens in the Falcon of the Millennium Empire arc, but that won't be for a while now. Now, Rosine continues to blitz Guts, as the Black Swordsman realizes that he can't rely on his usual tactics. Now, Rosine hasn't landed a death blow, so she decides to slow down a bit. Guts notices this, so he uses his Dragon Slayer to block his body, leaving his arms and head exposed. The Elf Queen impales Guts' arm with her antenna, as his metal prosthetic arm deflects it away from his face. And although it was very risky, this was all part of Guts' plan, to get caught on Rosine's antenna so that he could neutralize her speed advantage. The Apostle is then shocked to see that she missed again. "Oh well, maybe it will be fun to just stare at your bloody face for a while," remarks Rosine. "It's a date in the starry sky. Hold me close now, honey pie." While she says this, we see Guts fading in and out of consciousness. Falling asleep so soon? For shame, as we have such a pretty view of the moon. Now, Rosine takes in Guts' handsomeness for a moment, realizing why Jill took a liking to him. That being said, Rosine has no intention of giving up Jill to anyone. Jill is hers and hers alone. Rosine now intends to fly at full speed to tear Guts into tiny pieces. Bye-bye, this time I really mean it. And with this, Guts' eyes flicker open and he opens up his cannon to blast the Apostle right through the body. The Apostle screeches in pain as their two bodies begin to plummet towards the earth. Alright, so chapter 114 of Berserk was released on January 23rd of 1998. Young Animal No. 3 had the intro cover of Casca standing in some water. Additionally, an advertisement for the fight between Guts and Bascan in the 1997 was featured in the magazine as well. And Chapter 114 is titled Between Man and Demon. After crashing into the ground, Guts wonders why he missed with his cannon. He looks around for his Dragon Slayer, which has landed blade first into the ground. Now, Rosina has not lost her resolve. In fact, she is quite furious and wants to find and kill Guts immediately. Damn it, what a mess. I'm about to dig my own grave. I've already blown 3 chances to offer, says Guts. Now, perhaps Guts is hesitating here because he knows she's a child. But this hesitation is costing him dearly. And to make sure that he doesn't hesitate any further, he's going to block out his emotions, thoughts, and feelings, so that he can focus solely on killing the apostle in front of him. Guts can't get close to Rosine with her whip-like antenna, and with him being out of gunpowder, he can't use his cannon anymore. He then notices Jill amongst the flames and wreckage. That's when he gets a fiendish idea. Jill screams of fright from the fire, as she begs for Puck to leave her behind to save himself. Puck decides he'll bust one of the sacks, just like Guts did, to douse out the flames. Jill rejects the idea, as she begins to sob. She laments her decision of coming to the Misty Valley. In fact, she's so overwhelmed that she accepts her grisly fate and waits to die. Puck attempts to snap her out of it by yelling at her at the top of his lungs. A tree cracks and begins to fall. Before it crushes Jill, Rosine intervenes to save her best friend. Don't worry, trust me, I'll carry you somewhere safe. Wait here till I take care of him, says Rosine. Then the two of us will go where no one can stop us. Somewhere far, far away. Waiting in the flames, Guts sees his chance to eliminate the apostle. He emerges from the fire as some sort of hellish figure to drive his Dragon Slayer straight through her. And you'll notice here that he came dangerously close to killing Jill in the process. Rosine screeches in agony as she drops Jill near the flames. To save her, Guts kicks one of the cocoons open to douse out the flames. While she's saved, one of the partially evolved carcasses falls upon her body, along with a pool of blood. Rosine furiously takes off into the air, with Guts hanging onto her back. Now Puck is flabbergasted that Guts waited behind a curtain of flames for his opportunity to strike. Now Puck reminds Jill that it's her chance to escape, but Jill can only laugh in a delusional fashion at the sight that she just witnessed. Rosine wonders what Guts is, but he says she wouldn't remember. She wouldn't remember every last human she snacked on while playing her vile games. A human must never be allowed to cause pain for an elf, screams Rosine. She then uses her whip-like antenna to whip Guts off her back and into the open night sky. Now, before Chapter 115 came out, the Berserk 1997 Laserdisc and VHS were released for the anime. Now, Yoshihiko Omakashi did the artwork once more. And as for the chapter itself, it was released in Young Animal number 4. The art features Griffith fighting Guts prior to Guts' departure from the Band of the Hawk. And again, the artwork was done by Yoshihiko Omakashi. And with that, Chapter 115 is titled Firefly. In a brief flashback, we see Rosine running through the woods to the Misty Valley, all while clutching onto her baylet. This is it! The land of elves! All mine! In the present, Rosine has flown into a rage, screaming that a human should never take the life of an elf. She thrusts her antenna at Guts like a spear, impaling him in the face. The blow was not deadly, however, as it passed through Guts' other cheek. Lost in wrath, Guts bites down on the spike so that she can't escape. Rosine then realizes that she's in trouble, as Guts swings his Dragon Slayer straight down over her head, cleaving her torso nearly in two. Rosine's spike then comes out of Guts' face, as he descends to the earth. Rosine then loses herself in thought. She thinks about how the elves were nowhere to be seen in the Misty Valley. I'd known it. I hadn't really believed in them, in silly elves. Turns out that this was an escape for her from her fighting parents. Speaking of which, her parents found her in the Misty Valley one night. And while her mother was very caring and understanding, her father was anything but. Rosine's father smacked her down and began to berate her for humiliating him in front of the other villagers. The father continues his crude behavior, claiming that her antics have delayed the harvest. He mockingly asks her where the elves are, as he holds her by the hair and smacks her around. "Worthless superstitions! You're too old to believe in that crap," says the father. He asks if she left due to him not being her real father. And this fact, which she didn't know previously, utterly devastates her. Rosine's mother begs for him to stop, but he continues his tirade by hitting her next. Rosine thinks that this kind of thing cannot happen in the valley. She doesn't need this tumult. this emotional distress, this pain and suffering. Tears and blood stream down her face and onto the Beylit. The Beylit's eyes begin to open as the ritual would ensue. And we know from a previous chapter that she would sacrifice her parents for her dream of becoming an elf. In the now, Rosine begs for her parents' forgiveness as she descends towards the earth. Jill runs over to her friend, as Rosine confesses that the elves were never real. Despite waiting in the Misty Valley day after day, the elves never showed up. She is now certain that the Peacap tale is just a story that a child made up. Puck then tells Rosine that the elves really did live here long ago, but he's not sure why everybody left. He's an elf, see? A real one. Rosine reaches out to touch Puck, the first real elf that she's ever seen. And in this touching moment, we see something terrifying happening. Guts burst out of the lake, still overcome with wrath and ready to kill. Now on February 24th of 1998, Young Animal released the Berserk Special Blitzkrieg issue, and it featured 3 colorized images that looked absolutely magnificent. 3 days later, Berserk 116 would come out, which was titled Road Home. Rosine marvels at Jill's luck in finding an elf. Now you'll be alright, even with the bad stuff, alright? Jill sobs at the notion of her friend dying as we see Guts walk into the picture, but Guts has completely lost himself in rage, looking more like a wild beast than an actual man. Guts lumbers his way over as Jill begs for him to stop, and that's because Rosine can't fight anymore, so there's no use in him killing her. Why? Why do you hate her so much? Why? Screams Jill. Unflinchingly, Guts moves right past her and raises up his massive Dragon Slayer to deliver the final blow. Interestingly enough, Puck attempts to hold him back with his dandelions. As a last resort, Jill desperately uses her body as a shield to cover up Rosine. Guts hesitates briefly, and in this moment, an arrow pierces into his abdomen. Ta-ha! How about that? I hit him! I took down the Black Swordsman, says Zepik. Zepik communicates this fact to the Holy Iron Chain Knights, and they begin to open fire on the Black Swordsman in an attempt to save the children. Guts is clearly outnumbered, and since he's in a weakened state, his only recourse is to retreat into hiding. Although Zepik wants to join in on the hunt, Azan urges him to spend time with his daughter. His efforts were admirable, but his involvement with the Holy Iron Chain Knights is no longer needed. After Azan leaves, Zepik angrily throws down his crossbow, and it's because of the notion that his new military campaign is cut fatally short. Jill looks over at her shameful father, as Puck can't believe his embarrassing behavior. Now Rosine miraculously stands up, and says that she needs to go home. She unfurls her wings and takes off into the air. I have to go. Must go home now. The sun's going down, and the moon's already so high. We then see an image of Rosine as a child staring out the window. If I don't hurry home, Mom and Dad will be worried. She feels a strong urge to eat something, as her aimless flight turns into a descent. On top of a small hill between the village, where he no longer knew a single person, and the elf forest where no human was allowed to live, Peacat the Outcast cried and cried, his red eyes swollen even redder. And in the final image of the chapter, Rosine has a joyous dinner with her family. A very touching moment for the end of Rosine's character arc. And in reflection, it feels like her story is a story that we've heard before. You know, Casca was in a very similar situation to Rosine. Both of their villages were plundered and raped. Rosine was actually born from rape, and they just had very hard childhoods. And it's very understandable for a child of Rosine's age to yearn for something better, to yearn for something joyous and peaceful and placid. Something that's actually fun, something that would give her joy. And in every situation that we've seen an apostle in, they were a fully grown adult. They were totally conscious of the decision that they were making. They knew the consequences of their actions when they made that sacrifice. It may not have been easy, but they knew what they were getting into. And even though Rosine was a very smart, adroit girl, she was still a girl. She didn't know the full consequences of what she was getting into. And that's why I feel a lot of sympathy for her as a character. Perhaps if she was a little older, a little wiser, she would have made a better decision with her life. And yes, I understand that in the aftermath, she was turning children into elves and having them kill themselves. But again, I want to give her a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. She did have some dark tendencies, let's not brush that under the rug. But at the same time, she just wanted happiness in her life. And the reason that she ended up terrifying the villages, justified or unjustified, was because she saw the ills of the world. She was born from rape. She knew the consequences of war. So her tale in a lot of ways is very tragic. She really had one moment in which changed her entire life. She was put in a very desperate situation, but at the end of the day, that's kind of the point of the Beylets. It's to test your resolve. It's to put you in the very worst situation of your life and to see what you will do. To see if you will give in to the dark powers of the God Hand or to stand your ground. And, unfortunately, she gave in to the dark powers. But at the end of the day, it's a really interesting character arc, and it's one of the primary reasons why I really like the Lost Children's chapters. Now, on March 1st of 1998, Berserk released the art for the second volume of the Laserdisc for the 1997 anime. And it's a nice image of Griffith by Shichiro Kobayashi. Alright, so we're on to the last chapter of the Lost Children's chapters, and that's chapter 117, Elf of the Blue Sky. Jill stares up at the sky where she lost sight of Rosine. Now, like Pcaf, Rosine will never find her way home. And unfortunately, this will be her last flight. While tears stream down her face, a disgruntled Zepik feels like he was used by the Holy Iron Chain Knights. He orders his daughter to go home with him, but she says that she can't do that. Zepik attempts to whack her with his cane, but she dodges and tells him to head back to the village. While he yells at her to come back, Jill instructs Puck to find out where the Black Swordsman is. Now Puck wonders why she would want to see him, given everything that's happened, given everything that he's put her through. Yet despite it all, she can't leave this situation unsettled between the two of them. Meanwhile, Farnese commands the Holy Iron Chain Knights to leave no stone unturned in looking for the Black Swordsman. Serpico informs him that it's impossible to find him in this fog, especially with the fires inching ever closer. Now Farnese is furious that this one chance is slipping through her fingers, and doesn't want to relent. Now Guts has escaped into the foggier parts of the Misty Valley, where Jill, luckily enough, is the first one to find him. She wonders if he's going away for good. Now Guts thinks she's an idiot for following him after everything that happened. It's like I told you, huh? You're lucky to still be alive. You almost died plenty, your old friend was killed, and you're soaked in bloody sludge, says Guts. Keep hanging around, I promise you'll see more of the same. Jill reminds him that he saved her life when she nearly burnt up. She begs for him to take her with him, and says that she won't slow him down. She dives into him for a hug, and begs to be taken away from this horrible place. Look, take a good look around. A good look at the shadows, at the darkness around me. Jill freaks out at the horrific sight. Now Guts' world is nothing but abject horror and darkness. This is where the dead cling to the living, drawing in jealousy and yearning, a garbage heap of losers. You said you don't care where? Well, what you see is what you get. This is your paradise. The dark spirits crawl onto Jill's frail little body, as she can only cower in fear. No! Yells Jill. Guts slashes the spirits away with his Dragon Slayer. Unable to handle the situation, Jill trembles in fear. Guts covers her with his cloak and says, "There's no paradise for you to escape to. What you'll find, what's there, is just a battlefield." Tears stream down Jill's face as Guts abruptly takes his leave and tells her to go home. Jill pleads with Guts to reconsider, as Guts instructs her to return to her own personal battlefield. He disappeared into the darkness. In the end, I still didn't know who he was. Just like when he appeared, he took the demons with him. I was the only one left behind. I still don't really know these past days. Of fear, sadness, and shock were to me. The mist cleared away. The mist that would never go away was pushed out by the flames. The clear sky now peeks through. But it's by no means a spectacle that makes my heart leap. Like when I flew in the sky with Rosine. It's savage, lonely, cold. But such a vivid sky. It's a clear sky like the kind after a storm blows through. I don't have wings, so I guess I'll look up at the sky and crawl along the earth. Maybe the fluid from the cocoon he doused me with, mixed with Rosine's blood, washed away my childhood. And with this, Puck is ready to take his leave with Guts. For Jill, she's gonna try to change. She's gonna cry, shout, and bite her way through it if she has to. In her last remark, she wonders why Puck is going with Guts, and Puck thinks to himself and says, "I just can't leave him be, that idiot." Elves really do look best in the blue sky. In a tiny village nestled in a ravine, difficult to see even from the air, I think I'm about to start my own tiny battle. And with that, that's the end of the Lost Children's chapters, and the last time that we're going to see Rosine in the manga. It's actually quite surprising, because in later chapters, we sort of see a convergence of a lot of characters within the manga itself. a lot of characters end up in the same location, so it's kind of strange that Mira didn't include Jill in that. I would have thought Jill would have been one of those characters that maybe would have met up with the rest of the crew, but for some strange reason, he didn't do that. I mean, Jill's character arc ends in a very satisfying way, so I guess all's well that ends well, but at the same time, it would have been nice to see some kind of mention of her. Alright, so to end this video, I just got a couple more things to talk about here. On March 15th of 1998, Berserk 1997 official street murals were released. And the artwork was done by Shichiro Kobayashi and Yoshihiko Umakashi. And there's some really nice images. We got one here of the Band of the Hawk, Griffith, Casca, Guts, Judo, Rickards, Pippin, and Corcus. Just a really nice image. I really like the red. I like the shot of all the characters from the Band of the Hawk. It's just a really nice image. And then we also got one of Guts as well. And this is in the aftermath of the eclipse, as noted by the Brand of Sacrifice, the Dragon Slayer, and his missing right eye. And then we got an image of Guts, Griffith, and Zod for the Berserk 1997 VHS Volume 2. And then for the Laserdisc Volume 3, we got an image of Casca holding her sword. And then for the insert for that, we got an image of Zod here. So a really nice collection of images. Berserk items like this always just send my heart racing. I gotta be honest with you guys. Especially when I see an image I've never seen before. It really makes me excited, and it reminds me of why I love the franchise so much. I mean, for God's sakes, I've read the manga at least 4 times over, and the amount of times I've gone back to specific chapters is it's incalculable. Like, I just love the franchise. I love immersing myself within the story, within the characters, the theories, the fandom. It's just a really great experience, and I had such a pleasure going over the Lost Children's chapters with you guys, so thank you for watching the video. Look out for another Conviction Arc video in the future, and thanks once again, guys, and I'll catch you on the flip side.